Good evening and welcome to Vatican Connections. I'm your host, Noel Okel. This week, the Pope made history yet again by being the first Pope ever to set foot in the Arabian Peninsula. Embarking on what's his 27th international apostolic journey, the Pope traveled to the United Arab Emirates earlier this week with a very specific objective in mind. Now the question is, what was he hoping to achieve with that short 3-day visit to that Muslim country, and did he achieve it? Well, that's our feature story for the week. But before we get to that, let's have a look at some of the other stories we cover in tonight's show. The Pope treats over 1,300 of Rome's poor, homeless, and refugees with tickets to one of the city's hottest and most sought-after show. Just days after the largest gathering of Catholic youth in Panama, the Pope reflects on the 2019 World Youth Day with some fond memories. The ordination of married men into the priesthood. Is it a real possibility? If so, under what circumstances? And this week in the history of the Vatican, we look at the death of the longest-serving Pope whose body almost got dumped into the Tiber River. And I have all of that and more coming up on Vatican Connections next, so be sure to stay tuned. Okay, let's begin today with a look at some of the major headlines coming from the Vatican since last week, beginning with yet more proof that the Pope always thinks about the less fortunate in his diocese of Rome. Last week, the Pope bought all the seats to Monday's showing of the Universal Judgment, Michelangelo and the Secrets of the Sistine Chapel, that's currently showing at the famed Conciliazione Auditorium. The Holy Father then invited the poor, the homeless, refugees, and needy families to come and watch one of the most sought-after shows in Rome. The Pope's guests were treated to an hour-long show that took them on an interactive journey through time to discover the history of Michelangelo's masterpieces and his famed frescoes at the Vatican Sistine Chapel, using a complex combination of immersive 4K projectors, musics, actors, lights, and dance. The event was organized by the Office of the Papal Charities and show organizers that brought together over 1,300 of Rome's less fortunate for a special moment that highlighted both modern technology and the beauty of Michelangelo's incredible work in an event that they would normally not be able to attend. And we go to our next story now, where just days after returning from an exhausting 5-day trip to Panama, the Holy Father reflected back on his favorite moments during his weekly general audience last Wednesday. Addressing the pilgrims who came to see him at the Paul VI Hall, the Pope reflected on the importance of young people for society. Their gifts are not reserved only for tomorrow. Young people, he said, are the today, the now for the Church and for the world.
Oggi mi soffermerò con voi sul viaggio apostolico che ho compiuto nei giorni scorsi in Panama. Tra le tappe della GMG c'è sempre la Via Crucis, camminare con Maria dietro Gesù che porta la croce e la scuola della vita cristiana. Lì si impara l'amore paziente, silenzioso e concreto. Io vi faccio una confidenza, a me piace tanto fare il Via Crucis, no? Perché è andare con Maria dietro Gesù e sempre porto con me, per farlo in qualsiasi momento, un Via Crucis tascabile che me lo ha regalato una persona molto apostolica a Buenos Aires, e quando ho tempo prendo e seguo il Via Crucis. Ma fate voi il Via Crucis, perché seguire Gesù con Maria nel cammino della croce, dove Lui ha dato la vita per noi, per la nostra redenzione. A Panama i giovani hanno portato con Gesù e Maria il peso della condizione di tanti fratelli e sorelle sofferenti nell'America centrale e nel mondo intero. Tra questi ci sono tanti giovani vittime di diverse forme di schiavitù e di povertà. E in questo senso sono stati momenti molto significativi la liturgia penitenziale che ho celebrato in una casa di rieducazione per i minori e la visita alla casa famiglia Buon Samaritano che ospita persone affette di AIDS.
Now don't go away, we have our feature story coming up next. And this week, the Pope made history by becoming the first Pope to visit the Arabian Peninsula. His mission was an ecumenical one to promote a culture free from religious fundamentalism. In a journey themed around the United Arab Emirates 2019 Year of Tolerance, the trip was all about interreligious dialogue and solidarity among members of different faiths. And just days before his trip, the Pope's Vatican Secretary of State, Cardinal Pietro Parolin, opened up about the message the Holy Father wants to bring to the Muslim country and what he hopes to achieve. Have a look.
It is the first time that a Pope is going to the Emirates, United Emirates, and more generally in the Arabic Peninsula. For this it is a very important moment because the Holy Father is visiting a land which we can consider as a bridge between the Western and the Eastern world, and at the same time it is a land of multiculturalism, multi-ethnicity and multi-religion. And the message the Pope will underline with the leaders of other religion, the Muslims religion, is the message of fraternity, which means just to rediscover the common belonging to a unique humanity in which we are all brothers and sisters because we have the same dignity, we have the same duties and rights, and we have the same vocation to build a better world, a world of peace and reconciliation. Then, of course, one of the means to do so is to foster the interreligious dialogue, which is already a compromise of the engagement, a commitment of the Catholic faith. It will be just stressed in this occasion. And to fight against fundamentalism and radicalism, which is just the opposite of every religion, and of our common belonging to a same community of brothers and sisters. At the same time, the Pope is going there to meet the Christian community, which is a numerous community made by more than 3 million of people coming from neighboring countries and other parts of the world, just to find the opportunity of work, of employment there. But at the same time, it is a good experience also to meet others and to work with others of different conviction, religious conviction and belief. And the presence of the Pope will be just an encouragement just to continue to be this vibrant community which I had the occasion to meet during my visit a few years ago, and to strengthen their witnesses and their contribution for a construction of a world of dialogue, reconciliation and peace.
Now, on Monday, the Pope arrived at the Presidential Palace in Abu Dhabi, where the official welcoming ceremony and meeting with the Crown Prince took place. Upon his arrival at the palace to meet the prince and civil authorities, the Holy Father was welcomed in the grandest of style and opulence as the country took this unique opportunity to show the world how their guests are welcome and pampered in the UAE. The papal motorcade itself was accompanied by over a dozen horsemen on beautiful Arab stallions. they made their way through perfectly manicured lawns and wide avenues carrying the Vatican and UAE flags. A tactical aerobatic pilots also greeted the Pope from above, spurring trails of yellow and white smoke in honor of the Vatican colors. Now, interestingly enough, when asked why there were no crowds on the roads to greet the Pope as he traveled to the palace, the UAE media spokesperson said it's simply because all that happened inside the sprawling palace grounds, which covers a staggering 150 hectares. Okay, let's move on now. One important highlight I should mention from the Pope's visit to the UAE was the interfaith meeting that took place on Monday, where the Holy Father and the participants emphasized the importance of a culture of encounter to reinforce the commitment to dialogue and peace. And here's how that encounter went.
Con animo riconoscente al Signore, nell'8° centenario dell'incontro tra San Francesco di Assisi e il sultano al-Malik al-Kamil, ho accolto l'opportunità di venire qui come credente assetato di pace, come fratello che cerca la pace con i fratelli. Volere la pace, promuovere la pace, essere strumenti di pace, siamo qui per questo. Non si può onorare il Creatore senza custodire la sacralità di ogni persona e di ogni vita umana. Ciascuno è ugualmente prezioso agli occhi di Dio, perché Egli non guarda la famiglia umana con uno sguardo di preferenza che esclude, ma con uno sguardo di benevolenza che include. Pertanto, riconoscere ad ogni essere umano gli stessi diritti e glorificare il nome di Dio sulla terra. Nel nome di Dio Creatore dunque va senza esitazione condannata ogni forma di violenza, perché è una grave profanazione del nome di Dio utilizzarlo per giustificare l'odio e la violenza contro il fratello. Non esiste violenza che possa essere religiosamente giustificata.
And of course, we have been broadcasting the events from the Pope's journey live on the network, but if you missed it, you can rewatch highlights on our website at saltandlighttv.org, or you can catch a summary on Perspectives Daily. You, our viewers, asked it, so we'll answer it. Questions of the Week is up next. Father Tom, we got some letters from our viewers watching the show. Yeah.
Really?
With some interesting questions that I'd like to talk to you about today.
Okay, go ahead.
So Vanessa Sweeney from Halifax is asking about the possibility of married men being ordained to the priesthood. And she writes, Dear Noel, the Pope recently commented on the possibility of ordaining married men to the priesthood in extreme cases, but he doesn't want to be the one to stand before God with his decision. And it seems like she's referring to when the Pope spoke to the press on the way back from Panama. That sort.
It's one of the in-flight press conferences.
In-flight press conference, yes. And she writes here, under what circumstances could a married man become a priest, and don't we already have married Catholic priests who are formerly Anglican priests, and what would be the difference, and why would the Pope not want to make the call on this? This is what she wrote.
Well, it's just such an easy question, you know. You never come with easy questions. It's a complex question. Let's situate the question. Let's try to respond to the different levels of the question. The question was posed to the Pope on the in-flight press conference, these, you know, the most wanted press conferences that people love to have them, because he goes in the back of the plane and he entertains questions. Yeah. And I think some people were expecting him to say, oh yes, I'm going to allow priests to be married, and this will be one of the main topics coming up at the Synod on the Amazon next year. But the Pope was very careful in how he responded to the question. First of all, the Pope does not believe in, nor will he allow optional celibacy for priests. He feels, as his predecessors have felt, that celibacy, chastity, remaining single and not married, is absolutely essential for the Roman Catholic priesthood in the Latin Rite. Now, the question came up, well, in the Eastern churches, this is allowed in the Ukrainian church and some of the other Eastern rites, but that is not the Latin rite. It is allowed, and it's part of the Catholic household, but not the Latin rite priest. I am a Latin rite priest myself. I will not be married. I cannot be married because of my status at present. And it's like that. I accepted that, as many priests have accepted that. The Pope also spoke about the fact that under Pope Benedict, Anglicanorum Cetibus came about, which created the option for some Anglican priests or Episcopalian priests, depending on where you're watching this around the world, some from the Anglican communion could come over to the Catholic Church, and they could remain, they can still function as priests even though that they're married. The Pope even said, I've seen at general audiences some priests dressed up with their clerics on, and they're from the Anglican communion, they've come over to the Catholic Church, and they have wives and children, and that's a lovely sight. Nevertheless, the Pope said it is not up to him, and even quoted Pope Paul VI, it's not up to him to change this rule. But he also referred to an Australian priest, Father Lobinger, I believe, and Father Lobinger approached this from a theological perspective and said there are some communities in the world, whether they be in the Amazon, in other parts of the world, in the Pacific Islands, who do not have priests. And the theologian, said, the question remains, who can make the Eucharist? It's the Eucharist that makes the church that makes the Eucharist, and it's the ordained minister who celebrates the Eucharist, who consecrates the Eucharist in the Latin rite. Therefore, perhaps theologians have to do much more careful study on this about access to the sacraments, and if there are large portions of people, communities, who go without the Eucharist, who go without reconciliation, could that possibly be considered? And the Pope said that is a question that requires much more reflection, discernment, conversation, and theological investigation. So it's not an easy answer. For the time being, there is no optional celibacy in the Latin rite of the priesthood in the Roman Catholic Church. And the Pope has simply reaffirmed what his predecessors have said. Now, there's a question of the famous expression viri probati, which means tried men. In other words, men who have proven themselves, tried and tested. They may be widowers, they're leaders, catechists, they're elders in the community. Could it be possible that they can receive ordination so they can provide for the sacramental needs? This topic was raised at the Synod on the Eucharist in 2005, but it really didn't go anywhere. It's still out there because the question remains that there are communities of people who go without the sacraments because there is no priest, a Latin rite priest, able to serve them. So it's a big question. It's not an easy question. And simply by saying optional celibacy is out there now, that is not going to solve the problem. The real issue is, what is the nature of the priesthood, and how can we invite more people, more young men, more men to consider priesthood, ordained ministry, and the Latin rite of the Roman Catholic Church.
So it's not something that's going to be addressed anytime soon, especially
No, and certainly at the Synod on the Amazon, and I believe I'll be present for that Synod, all of these questions will come up about access to the sacraments. But we don't have referendums at these synods. You know, the media would like something to be decided, a vote right away, but that's not how it works. There's careful reflection over hundreds of years of history and what this means. What does the celibacy question mean for the Roman Catholic Church?
All right. Thank you for that one. That was a tough question.
Yeah. Would there be any simple questions this week?
Never. Yeah. That's why they're asked. Okay, so I have another one. An email came in the other day from Mark Simmons, and he's saying, Dear Vatican Connections, why does the Pope spend a lot of time and effort on interfaith and ecumenical activities and initiatives? I know that it's good, but what does it really achieve in the end? That's what he...
So, Mr. Simmons in Halifax, I believe, thank you, first of all, for writing. It's a very important and a very timely question, especially because this very week the Pope is making a truly historic visit to the United Arab Emirates, a Muslim country. It was fascinating to see the welcome he received. It was the welcome offered to a king. And here you have these horses and carriage and guiding this small little car of this humble person coming into this magnificent palace and whatever. The Pope is insisting on ecumenism, on ecumenical relations, on interfaith dialogue. because that is what his predecessors have done, and that's what the Second Vatican Council has asked us to do. These are not frills. These are not specialties. This is who we are as a church. At the Second Vatican Council, two very important documents were promulgated, approved by all of the Synod Fathers. One on ecumenism, our relationship with our sister churches, Unitatis Redintegratio, with the ecumenical decree, and then the subsequent teachings of these past years of that they may be one. The division that's out there among Christians is not a good witness to the world. And we have much to do. We've accomplished much and much more to do for Christians to work together. Pope Francis is deeply imbued with that spirit. He takes every opportunity he can to work for church unity. Another document coming from the Council, Nostra Aetate, is the teaching of the church, the decree of the church on our relationship, first of all, with Judaism, then with the religions of the book, as you want to call it, with Islam as well, and with other non-Christian religions. What we're seeing about the Pope this week is truly extraordinary. It is an effort to build bridges of peace. And if there must be bridges of peace with any particular group, it is with Islam. Because of the difficulties from an exaggerated, distorted version of religion from Islam over the past years. And the Pope is appealing to noble Islam, to our sisters and brothers in the Islamic faith, who can be agents with us for life, for peace, for justice. And what the Pope has taught us through the past 5-6 years of his ministry is the ecumenical and interreligious dialogue is about personal relationships. And so the friendship that exists with the Grand Imam of Al-Zahar University in Egypt, we see the welcome he received by these Muslim leaders, by sheikhs, by the prime minister and whatever. This is not just a photo opportunity. This goes to the Pope's talk at the interfaith dialogue, the interreligious meeting in Abu Dhabi was truly extraordinary. This is who we are as church. We have to be concerned with the internal. We have to be concerned with our relations with the world. And now more than ever, in a world that's torn apart, in a world that's filled with violence, in a world that delights in building walls and not bridges, the Pope is truly a man of peace, a prophet of peace, and he's appealing to what unites us at the deepest levels. That's why the Pope is doing this. And what comes about from this? Very simply, communication, dialogue, and peace. And all of us have to be instruments in that.
And we're going to see the Pope more in the next coming months as he travels to Morocco.
That's right. Another visit. You know, this is a Pope who's going very deep. His predecessors have done the same thing. His predecessors really did a wonderful job in reaching out to our Jewish brothers and sisters. We also saw Pope Benedict in the Holy Land meeting with different groups of people, Muslims as well, and Pope Benedict's high-level approach to dealing with Muslims, a theological, a deep dialogue that went on. John Paul II, of course, continued the great tradition of John the 23rd and Paul VI. But Francis has taken it even further. This is a priority for Francis. And the personal relationships, his gestures, his communication with these groups is extremely important. It offers a model to the world, and all of us have something to learn from it.
Well, thank you so much. Much appreciated.
It's a pleasure. Now, next week, come with some simple questions.
Okay, we promise. Thanks again, Father Tom. And finally tonight, we go back in time and look at one major historical event that happened this week at the Vatican. And this week in the history of the Vatican, on February the 7th, in the year 1878, the longest reigning pope in the history of the Catholic Church died at age 85. For 31 years from 1846 till his death in 1878, Giovanni Ferretti, better known as Pope Pius IX, sat on the seat of Peter. During his pontificate, Pius IX promulgated the dogma of the Immaculate Conception, articulating the long-held Catholic belief that Mary, the Mother of God, was conceived without original sin. During his pontificate, Pope Pius IX made no secret of his dislike for democracy, nationalism, or any other modernizing political forces that were beginning to sweep through Europe in the mid-19th century. However, his most important legacy was his convoking of the First Vatican Council in 1869, during which the dogma of papal infallibility was defined, as well as the centralization of the Church in the Vatican and the definition of the Pope's doctrinal authority. Sadly, it was a heart attack induced by an epileptic seizure on February the 7th that ended his Petrine ministry while he was saying the rosary with his staff at about 5:40 p.m. that evening. Now, interestingly enough, the saga doesn't end there. Pius's body, though originally buried at St. Peter's Grotto, was being moved to the Basilica of St. Lawrence outside the walls during a night procession on July 13, 1881. When the procession approached the Tiber River, an angry mob of anti-clerical nationalist protesters interrupted the procession with the intention of throwing the late Pope's body into the Tiber River in public protests. Luckily, however, written historical accounts tell us that the contingent of militia arrived in time to prevent the tragedy from happening. And the rest is history. And that's our show for the week. If you'd like to have your questions answered on our show, drop us a line on the Salt and Light Facebook page or on my Twitter handle listed below. I'm Noel Local. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you again next week here on Vatican Connections.